Sarah had always prided herself on her beliefs. Growing up in a small town, she was surrounded by people who shared similar opinions, and over time, those views had shaped who she was. She didn't think much of people from other races, especially black people. To her, they were different, and differences often made her uneasy. Her world was comfortably predictable, and she preferred it that way. She wasn't someone who would typically go out of her way to meet people who didn't look like her, and she was content with that. One cold winter evening, as Sarah drove home from a long day at work, something unexpected happened. She wasn't paying full attention to the road, distracted by thoughts of a heated argument she had with a colleague earlier that day. The icy roads made her tires slip, and before she knew it, her car skidded out of control. The crash happened so fast that she couldn't react in time. The sound of metal crumpling, the sharp glass breaking, and the sudden jolt of impact filled her ears, and everything went black. When Sarah woke up, she wasn't sure what had happened. Her head was pounding, and her body felt as if it had been broken into pieces. She tried to move but quickly realized that she couldn't. Panic set in. The room around her was dim, and there was a beeping sound nearby, an unfamiliar, rhythmic sound she couldn't place. Her thoughts were foggy, but she remembered the crash, the cold, the feeling of helplessness. She felt small, fragile, and scared. As her vision cleared, Sarah saw the sterile white walls of a hospital room, and it slowly began to dawn on her that she was alive. That thought made her breathe a little easier. But then, as she tried to adjust her position, she noticed someone standing by her bed. A man. He was tall, wearing a white coat, and he had a calm, focused look on his face. But as she looked more closely, her stomach dropped. The man who had saved her life, who was standing by her bedside, was black. Her mind raced. This couldn't be happening. In that moment, everything she had ever believed about people of other races came crashing down. Sarah's thoughts were clouded with confusion, anger, and a sense of injustice. How could someone like him have saved her? She had always believed that people of his race were somehow inferior, not capable of doing things like this, of being in charge of life and death situations. She wanted to ask him who he was, why he was there, but the words stuck in her throat. She felt weak and vulnerable, but a deeper part of her wanted to push back against the reality she was facing. Her discomfort with the situation grew, and before she knew it, the frustration she had been holding in spilled out. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice shaky, but sharp. She wasn't sure what she expected him to say, but she couldn't shake the disbelief. "You're the one who saved me." Her words came out faster than she intended, filled with a mix of anger and genuine shock. Dr. Marcus, the black surgeon who had just performed life-saving surgery on her, didn't flinch. He had heard all sorts of reactions from patients over the years, but this one was different. It was unsettling, and he felt a brief twinge of disappointment, but he kept his composure. He had a job to do, and no matter what Sarah thought or said, his duty was to help her heal. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension, but neither of them spoke again for what felt like a long time. Sarah's heart was racing, and Dr. Marcus stood there, silently, unsure of what was coming next. Little did they both know that this was just the beginning of a difficult journey, one that would force Sarah to confront her deepest prejudices and beliefs. As the days passed, Sarah's condition slowly improved. She had been in a state of unconsciousness for a while after the accident, and now she found herself lying in a hospital bed with tubes and wires attached to her body. Every movement felt like a struggle, but it was a relief to know she was alive. Still, something gnawed at her from within. She couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Marcus, the black doctor who had performed the surgery that saved her life. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see his face, the way he had stood by her bedside, calm and composed, while she felt everything inside her clash. Her frustration grew. She was angry, not only because of the accident, but because of the way she felt toward him. Sarah had always believed that people like Dr. Marcus weren't meant to be in positions of power. To her, doctors had to fit a certain mold, a mold that didn't include someone of his race. She hated that the man who had saved her life was someone she had so much prejudice against. In the quiet hours of her recovery, Sarah often found herself staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting in and out. She knew she had to talk to him. She didn't know how or what to say, but the idea of him treating her again made her uneasy. But at the same time, deep down, she couldn't ignore the truth. She was still here, breathing, because of him. It was a confusing and painful realization. She couldn't reconcile what was in her heart with the reality of what had happened. Finally, after a few more days, Dr. Marcus returned to check on her progress. He entered the room quietly, as always, and Sarah could see the calm professionalism in his every movement. She noticed that he didn't seem to hold any resentment toward her. He wasn't angry with her, even though she had made it clear how uncomfortable she was with his race. He was there to do his job, and he did it well. "How are we feeling today?" Dr. Marcus asked, his voice gentle and warm. There was no bitterness in his tone. He had seen many patients over the years, and many of them had reacted differently to his care. Some were grateful, others were indifferent, but he could sense that Sarah wasn't just dealing with physical pain. There was something deeper inside her that she was struggling to face. Sarah could barely look him in the eye. She didn't know how to respond. A part of her wanted to snap at him again, to express her anger and confusion, but another part of her felt ashamed. It wasn't his fault she had been in this situation. It wasn't his fault she was feeling so conflicted. Yet, she still couldn't get over the fact that the man standing before her, someone she would have never imagined saving her life, was the same person who had done exactly that. "I'm getting better," she said after a long pause, her voice low. Her eyes stayed on the bed, avoiding his gaze. She didn't want to meet his eyes because she knew she would see something in them that would make her feel even worse. Something that made her face the ugly side of herself. The side of her that still held on to biases she had never questioned before. Dr. Marcus nodded, as though he understood. He didn't push her. Instead, he continued to monitor her condition with careful attention, checking the machines and making notes on the clipboard. He could feel the tension in the air, but he didn't say anything. He knew this wasn't the right time to talk about what had happened. He didn't need to. He had already done his part. He had saved her life, and now it was up to Sarah to figure out the next step in her journey. The days went on, and Sarah's recovery continued, though she still couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her stomach every time Dr. Marcus walked into her room. The fact that he was so calm and professional only made her feel more uncomfortable. There were moments when she felt grateful, but she couldn't bring herself to show it. There was still a wall between them that she didn't know how to tear down. One morning, Sarah woke up to find Dr. Marcus standing by her bedside once again. She had become used to his presence now, but it didn't make the situation any easier. The truth was, despite everything he had done for her, she was still struggling with her emotions. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt stuck in her throat. She didn't know how to express the complicated mix of gratitude and confusion swirling inside her. Instead, she simply stared at him, not knowing what to say. Dr. Marcus noticed the tension in the air, the subtle discomfort that lingered whenever their eyes met. He had been in this situation before, where patients struggled to deal with the reality of being helped by someone they had never expected to be in a position of care. It wasn't easy, and he knew it would take time. But he wasn't in a hurry. He understood the power of time, and sometimes that was all that was needed for people to change. For now, he would let Sarah process things in her own way. "How are you feeling today?" he asked again, his voice calm but with a hint of curiosity. He had already read her charts, but he asked the question anyway. He wanted to hear it from her, to give her the chance to talk about how she was really feeling. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She didn't know how to answer. She wanted to tell him everything, the frustration, the confusion, the guilt, but something inside her made her hold back. She didn't want to look weak in front of him, especially after everything she had said before. But then she realized something. No matter how much she tried to hide her feelings, they were still there, waiting to be dealt with. The anger she had felt before had started to fade, but it was replaced with a different kind of discomfort, one that made her feel small. "I'm better," Sarah finally said, her voice softer than she had intended. She looked at him briefly but quickly looked away again. There was so much more she wanted to say, but she didn't know how to put it into words. Dr. Marcus gave her a small, understanding smile. He didn't push her to speak more. Instead, he did what he always did. He focused on her care. He checked the monitors, adjusted her medication, and made sure she was as comfortable as possible. His actions spoke louder than words. He wasn't there for a confrontation. He was there to help her heal, both physically and emotionally. But Sarah wasn't sure how long she could keep pretending everything was okay. Deep down, she knew something had shifted in her. She couldn't ignore the fact that the man who had saved her life, the man she had judged so harshly before, had treated her with nothing but respect. And she didn't know how to deal with that. For the first time, she was beginning to see the difference between the person she had believed him to be and the person he actually was. As the days passed, Sarah's physical condition continued to improve, but emotionally, she was struggling. Every time Dr. Marcus came in to check on her, the same wave of discomfort washed over her. She wasn't sure why it was so difficult to be around him. After all, he had saved her life. He had done something incredible. But still, the confusion and anger inside her were hard to shake. She had spent so many years holding on to certain beliefs, and now she felt like everything was falling apart. One afternoon, as Dr. Marcus entered the room, Sarah couldn't keep it in any longer. She had spent too much time pretending, and today, something inside her snapped. As soon as he greeted her with his usual warm, calm voice, she couldn't stop herself. She blurted out, "I don't understand. Why did you have to save me? Why does it have to be you?" Her voice was shaky, but there was no holding back anymore. The words rushed out of her, fueled by frustration and the confusion she had been carrying for so long. Dr. Marcus looked at her, surprised but not angry. He had heard these types of reactions before, and he understood where it was coming from. But still, it stung. He had spent years building his career, training hard, and now here he was, facing this. But he remained calm. His job wasn't to judge her or her feelings. His job was to make sure she was well again. "I saved you because that's what I do. I'm a doctor. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. My job is to help people, to save lives. I didn't do it for any other reason," he replied quietly. His tone was firm, but there was a kindness in his words that Sarah couldn't ignore. Sarah's heart raced as she listened to him. His answer was simple, but it hit her in a way she didn't expect. She had spent so much of her life judging people by the color of their skin, believing that people from her race were superior. And here, this man, someone she had once considered unworthy, had done something she could never have imagined. He had saved her life without hesitation, without asking anything in return. And now she felt her beliefs unraveling, piece by piece. But instead of accepting it, she got defensive. "You don't understand. People like you. You don't get to decide my fate. You shouldn't even be here, helping me," she said, the words coming out harsher than she meant. Dr. Marcus sighed, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not here to make you like me. I'm here to make sure you're okay. I don't need anything from you. Just your trust that I'm doing everything I can to help you heal." Sarah could see the sincerity in his eyes, and it made her feel small. She had been so quick to judge him, so quick to hate him, without ever considering that maybe her views weren't the truth. But she wasn't ready to admit that yet. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked away, avoiding his gaze. She didn't know what to say or how to make sense of everything that was happening. Dr. Marcus let the silence hang in the air for a moment, then began to gather his things. Before he left, he turned back to her. "You're going to be okay. Don't let your past beliefs decide your future." With that, he quietly left the room. Sarah sat there, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't want to admit it, but he was right. She had been letting her past shape her future, and now she had to face the reality that everything she thought she knew might have been wrong. She was confused, but for the first time in a long time, she realized that maybe it was okay to be confused. Maybe she didn't have to hold on to her old beliefs anymore. The next few days felt like a blur for Sarah. She spent most of her time lying in bed, the beeping of the machines and the quiet sounds of the hospital filling the space around her. Her body was slowly healing, but her mind was in turmoil. Dr. Marcus's words echoed in her thoughts. Don't let your past beliefs decide your future. It was a message she couldn't shake, and for the first time, she began to really think about her life and the views she had carried for so long. Her emotions were a mess. She had spent so many years judging people based on the color of their skin, believing things that had been taught to her from a young age. It was all she knew. And now, after everything that had happened, she felt lost. The man who had saved her, Dr. Marcus, was someone she never would have thought capable of doing something so significant. Yet here he was, a black doctor who had performed a life-saving surgery on her, with no expectation of anything in return. It wasn't just the shock of it all. It was the realization that she had been wrong. She had believed that people like him didn't belong in these kinds of roles. But now, she was faced with the undeniable truth that it was her thinking that had been flawed all along. The guilt began to settle in, and it was something she hadn't expected. She felt embarrassed by the way she had reacted, by the things she had said, but the hardest part was accepting that she had held on to those beliefs for so long without ever questioning them. As the days went by, Sarah found herself thinking more and more about Dr. Marcus. He wasn't like anyone she had ever imagined. He didn't seem to hold any ill will toward her, even though she had shown nothing but distrust and anger when he had first saved her life. In fact, every time he came in to check on her, he was calm, professional, and kind. He didn't push her to change or confront her views, but somehow she could feel that he was teaching her something just by being himself. One afternoon, as she lay in her bed, Dr. Marcus entered the room once again. He was checking on her progress, but Sarah had been thinking about something for a while now. She wasn't sure how to start, but she knew she couldn't keep ignoring it. As he adjusted the IV beside her bed, she spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. "I've been thinking," she began, the words feeling foreign as they left her lips, "about what you said before, about how I shouldn't let my past beliefs decide my future." Dr. Marcus looked up from the clipboard he had been writing on. His expression softened, and he put the clipboard down. "And what have you been thinking about?" he asked gently, his voice warm. Sarah hesitated for a moment, trying to put her thoughts into words. I've realized that I was wrong. About a lot of things. About you. About people. I didn't see you as a doctor. I saw you as something else, something that didn't belong in that role. And I can't believe I thought that way." The words hung in the air for a moment. Sarah felt exposed, but there was a strange sense of relief too. She had been carrying this weight for so long, and now she was starting to let go of it. She wasn't sure how it would all unfold, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep holding on to these old beliefs. She had to change, and maybe this was the beginning of that change. Dr. Marcus didn't say anything right away. He simply nodded, as if he understood. "It's not easy," he said, after a beat. "Unlearning the things we've been taught, especially when it's been a part of us for so long. But it's possible." Sarah looked at him, her heart racing a little. There was no anger in his eyes, no judgment, just understanding. And for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start to change. The days that followed were quiet, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had begun to change. She found herself thinking about her past beliefs in a way she never had before. The foundation she had built her life on was starting to feel shaky, like a wall that was ready to crumble. And the person who had caused this shift, the one who had forced her to confront her prejudices, was Dr. Marcus. The very man she had once doubted and judged had opened her eyes to a new way of thinking. It was confusing. Sarah was used to living her life in a way that felt comfortable, even if that comfort had come from ignoring the truth. But now, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She had been wrong. And every time Dr. Marcus came into her room to check on her progress, she felt the weight of her mistake. He didn't hold her past actions against her. He didn't push her to apologize or explain herself. He simply did his job and treated her with the same kindness and respect he would show anyone. That was the part that made it hardest to deny the truth. He had shown her nothing but professionalism, despite the way she had acted toward him. One afternoon, Sarah found herself thinking about her life before the accident. She thought about her family, her friends, and the world she had always known. She realized how much of her life had been shaped by beliefs that had been handed down to her without question. She had never stopped to think about why she believed the things she did, or whether they were really true. She had simply accepted them because they were comfortable. But now she was starting to see the cracks in that comfort. It wasn't easy to admit, but the more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that she had been living in a bubble. She had kept herself surrounded by people who thought the same way she did, people who shared the same prejudices. It wasn't until she had met Dr. Marcus that she had been forced to face the fact that her views were flawed. And it wasn't just about race. It was about the way she had judged people based on their appearance, their background, their differences. She had been blind to the truth for so long, and now she was beginning to see the world in a whole new way. As the days passed, Sarah began to feel a sense of discomfort and unease, not just because of the physical pain of her recovery, but because she was starting to realize how much work it would take to change. She had spent so many years holding on to her old beliefs, and now she was facing the reality that change wasn't going to happen overnight. It wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But at the same time, she knew that she couldn't go back to the way things were before. One evening, as she lay in bed, Dr. Marcus entered her room to check on her. She hadn't said much to him in the past few days, but today, something was different. She felt the urge to speak, to ask him questions, to try to make sense of everything. She wasn't sure how to begin, but she knew she had to try. "Dr. Marcus," she said, her voice tentative, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, about what I said, and about how I've been wrong." Dr. Marcus looked at her, his face softening. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the uncertainty that was still there. But there was also something else, something that made him believe she was ready to change, even if she didn't know it yet. "It's okay," he said quietly, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're starting to see things differently, and that's all that matters. Change takes time. Don't rush it. Just take it one step at a time." Sarah nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She wasn't alone in this process. Dr. Marcus had shown her kindness, patience, and understanding. Things she had never imagined would come from someone she had once believed was so different from herself. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's physical recovery continued to progress. She was slowly getting stronger, but there was something else happening within her, something that felt just as important as healing her body. The more she thought about her past, the more she realized how much she had missed out on by holding on to her old views. She had spent so many years in a world of comfort, only seeing things from one perspective. And now, for the first time, she was beginning to see things differently. Sarah couldn't ignore the change that had started in her. Every time Dr. Marcus came into her room, she felt a little more at ease. It wasn't that the discomfort was gone, but it was less intense. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, even though she didn't know how to express everything she was feeling. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully confront her past beliefs, but every time she spoke with him, she felt a little bit more like herself again. It was strange. She had never thought she would be able to change, but now it felt possible. One afternoon, as Dr. Marcus checked on her, Sarah felt a sudden urge to speak. She had been keeping her thoughts to herself for so long, but now she needed to say something. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we all have the power to change, and how it's never too late. Her voice was quieter than usual, but there was a certain determination in it that wasn't there before. Dr. Marcus looked at her, his expression kind but patient. "And what have you come to realize?" "I think I've been afraid of change," Sarah admitted, her eyes downcast. "I'd spent so many years in my own bubble, judging people without even realizing it. It's hard to admit, but I've been wrong about so many things. About you, about people I've never even bothered to understand." Dr. Marcus nodded, understanding that this wasn't an easy thing for Sarah to say. "Admitting it is the first step," he said gently. "It's a big one. Change doesn't happen all at once, and it's okay to take it slow. What matters is that you're open to it now. That's more than a lot of people can say." Sarah sat in silence for a moment, taking in his words. She had never been one to express vulnerability, but with Dr. Marcus, it felt like she could. She wasn't sure if she would ever fully let go of her past beliefs, but she knew that this was the start of something new. She was learning, growing, and realizing that it was okay to make mistakes, as long as she was willing to learn from them. "I just don't know where to start," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to make up for all the years I spent believing the wrong things." "You've already started," Dr. Marcus replied. "Every day you open your mind just a little bit more, you're making progress. That's what matters. You're taking the right steps, even if they're small." Sarah couldn't help but feel a little bit lighter. She wasn't sure how much longer her recovery would take, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be moments when she would feel lost or unsure. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had Dr. Marcus, who had shown her kindness and understanding when she needed it most, and for that she would always be grateful. As Sarah's physical recovery continued, she began to notice changes in herself that were even more significant than the healing of her body. The walls that had once been so firm in her mind, the beliefs and judgments she had held onto for so long, started to crumble. She had been reluctant to let them go, but each day that passed, it became clearer that these old views didn't belong in her life anymore. She felt like a new person, and yet she also felt like someone who was still finding their way. One day, as she sat by the window, watching the world go by, she realized just how far she had come. Not only was she physically healing, but emotionally, she was starting to let go of the fear that had once kept her stuck in a small, narrow view of the world. For the first time, she understood the power of change, the power of letting go of old habits and beliefs that didn't serve her. When Dr. Marcus entered the room that afternoon, Sarah was ready. She had spent a lot of time thinking about what she wanted to say to him. The words had been tumbling around in her mind for days, but now they were finally clear. She looked up at him as he came in, his usual calm expression making her feel more comfortable than she ever thought possible. "Dr. Marcus," Sarah began, her voice steady and filled with gratitude, "I wanted to thank you for everything. For saving my life, yes, but also for showing me that there's more to life than what I've always known. I've spent so many years holding on to ideas that weren't even my own. I was wrong about so many things, but because of you, I'm beginning to see the truth." Dr. Marcus paused, his face softening as he listened to her. He had seen this kind of transformation before, but it never stopped being meaningful. People changed in ways they never thought possible, and it was always a quiet victory. He nodded, his tone warm and sincere. "You're the one who made the decision to change, Sarah. All I did was be here for you when you needed it. The real work was done by you." She smiled softly, a genuine smile that felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. Freed from the limitations of her past beliefs, free from the anger and the fear that had held her captive for so long. "I'm still learning," she admitted, looking down for a moment. "But I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better person, not just for myself, but for everyone I meet from now on." Dr. Marcus smiled back, and in that moment, Sarah knew that her journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but now she felt ready to face them. She knew there would be moments of doubt, moments where the old beliefs might try to creep back in. But she also knew that she had the strength to overcome them, because she was no longer alone in this. She had learned to rely on herself, but she had also learned that kindness, understanding, and patience were essential parts of growth. As Sarah looked out the window once more, she realized something important. Change wasn't just about letting go of the past, it was about embracing the future, with all its unknowns, and finding peace with who she was becoming. She felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years, a quiet confidence that had been born from her own willingness to change.